Hi, everybody, and welcome to this episode of my podcast. I will be uploading these to YouTube. It is basically a summary of some of the rough drafts that I'm writing about my new book. In today's episode, I will be covering chapter 4 of the book. The chapter's name might be 80/20 Your Child's Health for Now. This title might change, it depends, but that is what I came up with for now. But I think the information that it has in it is more important than the actual title. Those things would be rounded off later on. So without further ado, here is the chapter. What is 80/20? The best way to explain the process of 80/20ing something is through some statistical storytelling. In 1896, at the University of Lausanne, there was an economist, Vilfredo Pareto. He made a peculiar observation that there is a disproportionate distribution of causes and their relevant effects. That was a mouthful. He made the hypothesis that when comparing two sets of data, the causal set would be much smaller than its effects. For example, he discovered that about 80% of the land in Italy was owned by only 20% of the population. Today, this example is no more clearer in our world than the distribution of wealth. Here are some other examples. About 80% of your company's sales are generated by 20% of your customers. If happiness was quantifiable, it would be that our happiest moments or our most successful moments only occur in about 20% of our time on Earth. Of course, this rule is not exact, but for consistency, it is better to model it this way. So what is it then about this principle that makes it applicable to the health of your young ones? This chapter will show you how energy restriction alone can improve their base health by covering markers like heart health, insulin, and lifespan. And then further, it will show how 80/20 thinking tackles the most important part to dieting, adherence. Calorie restriction, the 20%. Before learning about Pareto and this principle, I would like to believe that I actually have been applying this principle invariably throughout my own battle with childhood obesity. It's not that I think I've discovered the principle by myself. Rather, I think that my natural state of so-called laziness led me to search for this minimal effective dose. I knew that I needed something that I would adhere to. I struggled to compartmentalize more than a few ideas at a time, so finding a single variable that I could control seemed to be the only real chance of me maintaining a post-illness weight loss. This led to an ambitious search for the way. I believe that caloric restriction was my golden key. It had a tremendous impact on the consistency that I could apply to my eating habits, but above that, I also discovered that it assisted in many other health advantages: obesity, caloric intake, and heart disease. To explain the significant impact caloric intake and its relationship to fat storage, and specifically the implications that it has on heart health, I'm going to look at a well-cited study in the American Journal of Physiology, Endocrinology, and Metabolism. Firstly, there exists a linear relationship between adiposity, aka stored fat, and coronary heart disease. This is to say that our risk of lifestyle-induced heart disease increases with our levels of body fat. Furthermore, not only does this positive relationship exist, but it is actually strengthened through evidence of improved coronary heart disease risk factors by calorie-restricted weight loss. All the subjects in the above-mentioned study improved their plasma LDL cholesterol, total cholesterol HDL ratio, HOMA-IR index, and CRP concentrations through weight loss that was induced by a negative caloric balance, which we'll later understand as a net outflow in our cash flow statement. With all the scientific evidence aside, and to bring you back into perspective, that means that through plain caloric restriction, you can reduce the chance of your child being killed by a disease that kills 1 out of 4 people in America every year. I don't mean to fearmonger you, but that is a very practical way to 80/20 their health. So what about the other major killers? I've already discussed the positive effects of caloric restriction on glucose metabolism and insulin, But again, in that same study are references to 10 other studies that prove the insane impact that caloric restriction has on circulating insulin, blood glucose level, and insulin sensitivity in general. Again, in 2015, there were 1.6 million deaths related to diabetes, according to the World Health Organization. Currently, there are over 400 million adults diagnosed with diabetes worldwide. So, by simply reducing and finding a way to manage your child's caloric intake, you are creating a huge outcome through minimum cause. That is the perfect example of 80/20ing something. Caloric restriction and lifespan. Currently, there exists few scientific studies on the impact of caloric intake and lifespan of humans. This is not because they believe there will not be a significant impact, but mostly due to logistical problems. I mean, it would be very difficult to control a study for such a long period of time. There does, however, exist many animal studies that show how strongly these two variables correlate. Caloric restriction slows down the rate of aging in mammalian species up to the point of starvation. This means that the less they eat, the slower they age. If we can relate these findings to our human biology, which I believe we can, we should be applying it consistently to our young if we would want them to live a longer life. Now, before continuing, I would like to explain to you why I'm taking all these extremes into consideration. It is purely to illustrate to you why I am passionate about this book. I do not recommend placing your children under trial or starving them, but this information will show you the purpose of why I believe in my system. There's only one major factor to focus on, and in return, you will get massive results. I do understand that most parents today are busy. I understand it because I am the child of a busy parent. I see the pattern of how business is run by systems of balance and consistency. But underlying those systems are the actual value you are trying to provide to your customers. These findings are my way of showing you the value of the weight accounting systems that I will be teaching to you in upcoming chapters. So, guys, thank you for tuning in today to this first episode of the podcast. I really hope you found some value in what I read to you and that you can go think about this 80/20 principle and how to apply it to not just your own health, but to the health of your children. I do believe that we can affect the health of our young and increase their lifespan, not only through sheer dieting and hard efforts, but by finding the right things to focus on, by changing the small things that have a massive impact. If you did enjoy this podcast, I would please ask you to share this or comment and like so that it gets recommended on YouTube. I will be making more of these as the book progresses. Thank you and have a good day.